Hi, everybody. Thanks, Mike. This is a recording, so I won't be able to take any questions later. Not that there usually are many, but happy to be here, even in a more virtual sense. So what I'm going to do right now is share the screen, I hope, and see if, in fact, should all be able to see a PowerPoint presentation that says, "What will my woods look like?" And in just a second, we'll get going with that. I'll move through it quickly. The cover picture here is of a booklet that you'll all be receiving that Mike will be passing along to you sometime later. And more about that in a second. So this is kind of part of the Maine Healthy Forest Program, something that's been around for a dozen years or so, although it really is what we've always done at the Maine Forest Service, working with woodland owners, loggers, foresters, to try to get good outcomes when woods are managed. Part of the goals of the program are to help forestry professionals help woodland owners meet their harvesting goals while operating and maintaining a healthy business. The program also recognizes the importance of communication and visual impact in timber harvesting, viewing timber harvesting with an eye towards aesthetics and achieving goals, and introducing a new tool to prompt discussion before the job begins. We'd like to mention that the Certified Logging Professional Programs Board of Directors added this to their code of ethics. The professional logger implements a contracted harvest with the explicit intent of achieving goals of the forest landowner or their agent. So before we get into that, a couple things that we know or we think we know about Maine's family woodland owners. And family woodland owners we kind of define as the folks owning between 10 and 1,000 acres. So often referred to as the small woodland owner. Why do these folks own their land? Well, based on a survey that we did in Kennebec County a while back, the number one reason is the land came with their house. Number two is they own it to enjoy beauty or scenery. Number three is privacy. You have to get down to number 12 before they mention timber products, and then it's usually something about firewood for their own use. Remember, this is why people own land. Some of the attitudes that they have about timber harvesting, based on their experiences, their expectations, and their goals for the land. A lot of times that's influenced by their neighbors and the general public. And of course, that works both ways. Landowners that have good experiences with timber harvesting are going to help influence their neighbors and community members in a positive way. And as professionals, the Maine Healthy Forest Program encourages forestry and logging professionals to be trusted service providers for harvesting on family woodlands. Some questions that we could be asking ourselves as resource professionals, and I certainly include myself as a forester and foresters in this. Do we have our blinders on? When we look at the woods, have we trained ourselves to see some things but not others? Are we locked into our own story about the woods or woodland owners? And I'll talk a little bit more about that story in a minute. Do we go in acting like a welcome guest who wants to be invited back? Or is it just like, let's get this over with as quick as we can and hope that nobody gets hurt and we don't break any laws? This is all part of business decisions. And of course, the first decision or question of any business is, who is your customer? When I ask that question in a group of loggers, when we have the opportunity to actually have a conversation, the answer is very often the landowner is our customer. And then the next question is, who pays you? And of course, most of the time that's a mill or many mills. So it sets up an interesting situation because normally your customer pays you for what you provide, right? So in this case, you have a customer that in fact you pay them most of the time. So how does that all work out? Makes it interesting. It's all part of risk management. Any business needs to figure out where their vulnerability is. And it's also part of that question I mentioned earlier, or referred to, service provider versus commodities extractor. You know, as somebody who takes board feet and cords and tons out of the woods and takes them to the mills and gets paid for them, that's kind of the commodities side of things. But I would submit that you and we as foresters, we are all providing a service to landowners as well, although sometimes it's a little harder to see how we get paid for the service, at least in the case of a straight up stumpage sale. And as always, communication is key. So I mentioned story. We have a story for the woods. It's based on our training, our experience. You know, we know that when you cut trees, new trees grow back, or the trees you leave fill out, you know, the crowns spread out, and you know, a lot of the initial debris starts to break down. We know this, but are we effective at communicating this to our customers, to woodland owners? What is their story? You know, they come to the woods probably with, as I mentioned, different backgrounds, different expectations. What do they see when they see their woods compared to what we see? And of course, you hope that they ask questions, but do they always know what questions to ask, let alone ask them? I'm quite certain that they don't always know. In fact, we've sat in workshops with woodland owners where they come out and say, hey, we didn't even know what to ask. We just sat there and nodded our heads. So as professionals, sometimes it's our job to help them ask the questions they need to know. Over the years, SFI, the Maine Forest Service, and other groups have developed workshops about logging aesthetics and visual impact, and we've developed this list of principles of logging aesthetics. I'm not going to read them all, but I want to mention a few of them. The very first one, aesthetics are a form of communication. That's really, if there's just one of these that you remember that one. What people see is so important. You know the expression, perception is everything. Well, basically, we as humans take in a lot of information with our eyes, and we make a lot of decisions and judgments based upon what we see. You know, what you see is what you get. You've heard that one. You also probably have heard that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, which is absolutely true. So it's very important to identify the beholders and where they behold from. So when you're working on a parcel of land, who is the primary beholder? Is this the backyard of where the landowner lives? Do they see it every morning from the back of their kitchen, or you know, from their driveway? Is it remote from the landowner but next to a busy road, well-used snowmobile trail, what have you? There's certain places and therefore certain angles of viewing that are get more attention than others and should get more attention. With respect to attention, landings generally have the greatest visual impact on most harvests. This stands to reason because that's where most of the activity is. You got all the equipment, all the trucks, all the wood, one time or another passes through there. So, you know, that's where the most is going on, and therefore has the most effect on the way things look. Just one other principle to mention: planning for aesthetics improves results and reduces costs. Like planning for almost anything can improve results and help reduce costs. So we've got some tools that we have at our disposal, some written tools such as planning tools such as a forest management plan, a harvesting plan, which might be a little more specific than a 10-year forest management plan. The harvest plan might get down into saying where are those important visual areas where we need to maybe do something different. The timber sale agreement or the stumpage contract is another place to write things down. You can use checklists. The Harvest Satisfaction Survey, HSS, I'll mention a little bit more in a second, can act as a checklist. The importance of writing things down for me is so that 6 months or a year later, when you're actually doing the work, you remember what everybody said. It's pretty easy to have a meeting at the kitchen table or even walking in the woods, and everybody verbally agrees, and then the activity actually doesn't happen for a while. So what did everybody agree to do, and who agreed to do it? The value of a checklist can be, you say that this person or this company or whomever is going to take responsibility for this task and when they're going to do it. And again, it just helps people remember who said what. Pictures are a great tool. Perhaps some of you already have pictures of your finished work that you show to landowners that you hope to work with. We encourage it. And in fact, that's what this booklet is about that we'll get to. So really all this comes down to a cost-benefit analysis. You know, what is it worth to do something? What's the cost of doing it? What's the benefit? What's the risk if we don't do it or we don't do it well? So the harvest satisfaction survey is something we've introduced to loggers and foresters over the past few years. The Maine Forest Service does this annually to a randomly selected group of those family woodland owners with less than 1,000-acre ownerships that have completed harvests in the past year or two. And we ask a series of questions about their overall satisfaction, how their woods looked after the harvest, were they satisfied with the financial outcomes, did they use a written timber sale agreement, was it useful and effective, did they work with a forester, and were their harvesting goals met? And remember we talked about why people own land. Well, why people cut wood is a little different. Income, of course, is either number one or number two in all the surveys we've taken. But the one that's also either one or two is woodland improvement. So again, it sets up this interesting situation. People want to make money, but they want things to improve in some way. So an actual landowner question from a workshop conference of a number of years ago. When a forester asked the landowner, well, what's the important part of your forest management plan? And that landowner said, well, I like a lot of the stuff that's in it, but what I really want to know is what will my woods look like? So based upon that, we developed a book to help answer that question. A booklet. It's called What Will My Woods Look Like? It's a series of pictures before and after, and hopefully during, if we can get them, to show what happens when woods is harvested, the change. Again, it's a way of helping to tell the story. It's a visual way of telling that story that we all know, but sometimes it's harder to explain. Words don't always convey it, certainly not as well as pictures. Definitely not as well as going there, but not everybody can get to look at a harvest. That's ideal, but in the meantime, if you have something that you can show them, we're hoping that that will help. Speaking of the words, we put some text into the book in an attempt to sort of translate between the way a woodland owner may look at their woods, a forester would look at the woods, and of course the way loggers do. They're three separate parts of the team, if you will, that hopefully works together to get the good results. There's different languages that are used, particularly foresters use some jargon that sometimes we think we know what we're saying because we understand it, but it's helpful to help translate that to a landowner. The first series of pictures in the book is a series of 4 actually on the same woodlot where we were able to show before, during, which helps to demonstrate the equipment, immediately after, and then 5 years after. So this is really a great situation when you have a series like that. Tells an even better story. And we also include a little inset of some wildlife aspect because we know that woodland owners are very interested in wildlife. One of the picture sets in here, and I'm not going to go over all of them, but a couple of the more interesting ones, I think. We have a set in there of looking up before and after a harvest. Very often, landowners do not look up unless directed to. Most of them, when they walk through the woods, they like to look at eye level or they're looking at the ground to make sure they don't trip over something. Foresters and loggers look up. And so what looks like a big opening on the ground, when you look up, you see it's not so much. In this particular case, you see the before of what really would be a closed canopy if the leaves were out, and now it's created a small gap, which is very beneficial for some birds and also helps let a little light down on the floor of the forest to start some regeneration. Another thing, we didn't want to just show partial cuts, nice little thinnings. Here's a patch cut. Turns out a patch cut can look pretty good, particularly if there's a couple of pine trees that are left to grow in it. So there's a nice visual object. And want landowners to understand that it's not always about thinning. Sometimes it's a good idea for various reasons. In this case, wildlife habitat for woodcock. We want to start again with early successional forest. I mentioned landings. Landings, again, high impact visually and otherwise, often very important. In this particular case, this landowner was a very public location, and that landowner consciously decided to take a lot of the money that they made from the harvest and put it back into not just cleaning up the landing, but actually doing some landscaping. You can see they planted grass, they planted a few extra trees, they actually made it a little parking area. Now, not every landowner is going to do that, but some landowners may be interested in something like this. This tends towards being that service part of what you may be providing the landowners. The important thing is to talk about it ahead of time and know who's taking care of that, who's paying for it, and how that payment arrangement will be made. So that's about it. I just want to say we're always interested in getting more picture sets. If you have some or would like to start doing that on your harvest jobs ahead, try to get the picture from the very same spot each time so it's really clear that somebody's looking at the same place. If you can have a recognizable feature in the picture, like stone wall, fence line, a particular big tree, a boulder, something. So again, when somebody looks at the before and after, they know they're looking at the same place. That really helps. You can write your own captions and descriptions and send them to us. We're perfectly happy to keep the landowner's name confidential if they want it. We're not looking for anonymous submissions, but we can we will not broadcast. Excuse me. We will not publish the name and location of the woodlot unless that woodlot owner is happy or willing to do so. There's contact information right here. This is the website where the same picture book is there on the web, and there's also a PDF version if anybody wants to just download that and print out pages that they find useful. Of course, as I mentioned, Mike is going to get copies of the actual book to you all. We hope that you find it useful to as part of that before harvest conversation. It may help some landowners understand what's going to happen. So that's all I've got. I appreciate your time, and I think we'll call it right there since this is a recording and I can't really take your questions anyway, but thanks again.